Just a gentle note before we begin, today's conversation includes discussion of cancer diagnosis and treatment. Please listen in a way that feels supportive for you. You're welcome to pause and come back at any time. Cancer has a way of rearranging everything, not just for the person diagnosed, but for the partner, the family, the caregiver who becomes the organizer, the translator, the medication manager, the emotional container, often while still trying to keep working and life moving. And if you're the one holding it together, it can feel like there's no space for you to actually fall apart. People might check in on the patient, but you're the one tracking appointments, making meals, managing the admin, staying calm for everyone else, and quietly carrying the fear. Today's conversation is for you if you're supporting someone through cancer, treatment, and you're running on empty. You're trying to stay hopeful without denying how hard it is. And you want something real, not toxic positivity, not pressure, just steadiness and language for what you're living. My guest is Dr. Jeffrey Reynolds, an Ironman triathlete, non-profit CEO, and two-time cancer survivor. After being diagnosed with prostate cancer, Jeff went on to face a second diagnosis, stage 3 colorectal cancer, within 2 years. His book, Every Mile Matters, shares what endurance training taught him about getting through treatment and what cancer taught him about vulnerability, support, and redefining what a win even means. Jeff, welcome to Radiant Moments.
Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
Jeff, I'd love to begin at the beginning because those first moments shape everything. You've shared that you found out about your first diagnosis while stopping at a traffic light, reading results on your phone. Can you walk us through that moment? What happened inside you and what changed immediately?
Sure. It was April 1st, 2022, which here in the States is April Fool's Day. It's the day when you play practical jokes on people. And so, as you mentioned, I'm heading down the highway. I get a notification on my phone. I try not to text and drive for obvious reasons. And I get to a stoplight and then I jump into my healthcare portal and I scroll through pages of medical jargon that, although I'm educated, I don't completely understand. And then I get to the punchline, and the punchline says clinically significant prostate cancer likely. Look, 2 million Americans a year will hear the words, "you have cancer," for the first time. Most won't find out via a text message on their phone at a traffic light, but it completely upends your world. If I had to describe it, it's like almost everything goes into slow motion. Like in the movie when something's about to happen and everything goes into slow motion. That's what happened to me. And next thing I know, there's cars behind me beeping because I'm sitting there at a green light. And it changes everything. This kind of this old adage that life could change in a moment's notice. And it can. This is proof that it absolutely can change. And I think the first things that went through my mind were, am I going to die? Cancer, right? We automatically equate the two things together, although prostate cancer isn't among the deadliest cancers. Reality is most men will get prostate cancer over the course of their lifetime. Most won't even know it, and they'll die of something else before they ever find out. And so it's a highly treatable cancer, as many cancers are these days. But you immediately go to, am I going to die? I didn't feel sick. I don't understand. So I found out I had cancer. I had no symptoms whatsoever. And so this was a routine physical. And so what was a little surprising, how could this be? Did they mix up my medical records? That's all the denial. And it's almost like you go through those stages of grief all in a moment's notice. It's like you just fly through those moments. And first it's, panic. And then it's like, no, that can't be it. And then it's the bargaining of, well, it's prostate cancer. Maybe they could treat it. What do my options look like? And so you go through all of those cycles. I didn't really get angry about it at any point, but just immediately you go through that range of emotions. And I reached out immediately to my partner, now wife, and said, get a load of this. You're not going to believe what happened. And so it's being thrust into a whole different world. And as other folks who have come on your show have probably shared, there's this valley between the time you're diagnosed and the time you get treatment. And it takes time to arrange treatment, depending upon where you live and what insurance you have and where you get care. For me, there was, probably a week between the time I got the text message and then some more very invasive tests to figure out what the way forward would be. And in that valley, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of angst. There's a lot of, this was before ChatGPT was as big a thing as it is now, but there's a lot of Googling every term in your test results. So everything I didn't understand, I'm Googling saying, what does this mean? and you wind up doing your own research for better or worse. And sometimes it is for the better because you could get information. Problem is you don't know what's real and what's not. And some of the information you get is just lousy information. It changes your world literally with the flick of a switch. And then you're cast into this almost void where you try to make sense out of the diagnosis. You try to figure out what the success rates look like in terms of treatment. You try to make sure that you've got a treatment plan in effect. And then you move into, I need to set up the appointments. I need to do this. And then you have a plan and a way forward. The period of time where you don't have that way forward and you don't have that plan is a rough place to be sometimes.
With your cancer diagnosis and having to go through that process, it sounds like it was really a life-altering moment where your world went from day-to-day management of work and getting to and from places to now having to add in a complex medical process that altered when you could go to work, when you couldn't, when you could see friends, how well you felt in yourself. I was reading about the fact that you did an Ironman. And people hear that and they often assume fitness equals safety. How do you respond to the misconception that being healthy prevents illness?
So it was, because as you said, just 4 months earlier, I had done Ironman Florida. And for folks who don't know, an Ironman race consists of a 2.4 mile open water swim. Most people don't know how long it takes to swim 2.4 miles in the open water. It's a 2-hour swim where you're swimming vigorously for 2 hours. Then it's a 112-mile bike ride, and then it is a full 26.2-mile marathon running. You have to do the entire thing in under 17 hours, otherwise you're disqualified. And so I did it in 15 hours and 9 minutes, so I had almost 2 hours to spare. And so when I got the diagnosis, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm as healthy as could be. Are you kidding me? There is zero chance this is happening to me. And then I quickly pivoted to, well, wait a minute, that means that I did Ironman Florida with cancer. Well, so I could deal with just cancer then. So I had already done both. But one of the things that I think tricks us somehow is that health and fitness are the same. And I was very fit, but that doesn't mean that bad things can't happen to you health-wise, and you could get a diagnosis that comes out of nowhere. It does mean in some regards that you're better equipped to deal with that diagnosis or to deal with the illness. As you previewed in the intro, I would go on to be diagnosed with stage 3B colorectal cancer just 14 months later. And when I got that diagnosis, and I got that following a routine colonoscopy, again, zero symptoms whatsoever, I felt fine. This was just, I'm going in to get my routine tests as I should, and everybody should do that. And so as we mapped out the treatment plan for that disease, I was able to enroll in a clinical trial in which I got more chemo than the average person gets. So instead of a 2 chemo drug combination, it was 3 drugs. And part of the reason I was able to do that was because I was in good shape. And so fitness never protects you from a health issue. It is, though, I think, money in the bank for the inevitable thing that will come along. We will all get sick unless we get squished by a garbage truck. We will all get sick from something. Something's going to impact us and potentially eventually take us out. None of us are getting out of here alive. So something's going to get you. But you want to be in the best possible shape for whatever threat comes around. In my case, my doctors and extensive genetic testing was able to find no potential cause for 2 cancers in 14 months. And so I wasn't downtown at 9/11. I didn't grow up in a house ridden with asbestos. I didn't drink water fountain laden with lead. So I didn't have anything that was a known risk factor. When they looked at me genetically, they said, yeah, there's really no risk factors. And so by all accounts, I probably shouldn't have gotten cancer, but I did. And so that's the unpredictability of it. So fitness is not going to protect you from getting a cancer. Anything can happen anytime. I will say the benefit in being fit is that it makes you better able to manage the treatment regimens. It means you're going into it stronger, more efficient, but it's what the book is about. For me, it also gave me the mental fortitude and framework to battle 2 back-to-back diagnoses. I wouldn't say without skipping a beat because that would be exaggerating, but the mental training that went along with triathlon made dealing with the disease process a little bit easier.
When you were describing what's involved in a triathlon, because you think, okay, there's a run, there's a swim, and there's a bike, but when you put it into numbers and how long it actually takes, and that you have this countdown going constantly in your mind that you've got to beat this time frame, it's that same situation where you have a clock when you get a diagnosis. that then starts in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
And it's that ordinary moment that becomes life altering. And it's an experience that a lot of caregivers who are in a situation where they're supporting somebody through a cancer journey, it's like their life splits into two for both the person they're caring for and themselves. There's the before and then there's the after. What do you wish loved ones and caregivers understood about those early days before you even know what treatment will involve?
Yeah, I think lots of folks look for the right thing to say. And sometimes there isn't the right thing to say. And sometimes you don't have to say anything. When I got my first diagnosis, person who's now my wife and I were dating about 6 months. And I remember going to her after the first diagnosis and saying to her, look, you didn't sign up for this. Like, this wasn't part of the deal. And so if you need to tap out, I completely understand and get it. And of course, she said, that's ridiculous, right? Fortunately, for the second time, I'm like, my God, twice in 2 years, this is pretty significant. And I think, one of the things that helped me the most was her calm demeanor. Yeah, we talked about it, but we didn't dwell on it. In fact, the day after it was April 2nd, it was her birthday. We went away. And so she's like, do you want to cancel a trip? I'm like, no, I want to feel normal. Like, I understand this is life changing. It's still going to be here when we get back from the weekend trip. And so there's a couple things, we want normalcy more than anything else. At least I did. And maybe that's not the case for everybody, but you acknowledge the diagnosis, you get it, you understand that there's a treatment path, but you don't want to lose everything else along the way. And for me, if I allowed cancer to take away that weekend trip or to take away, joy in my life, well, then cancer won. And so some of it is, how do you maintain the normalcy that was once there? I will say, for men. And so very often women are much better caretakers than men by and large. And men tend to be more infantile when it comes to even the common cold. Maybe there's some stereotypes there, but I think there's a reason things are stereotypes. And so there's some truth to it. One of the things for men is men don't often talk about these things. And sometimes the caregiver needs for you to have a conversation, and you need to share as the patient what's going on in your mind so that you're both on the same page. And I think particularly, and I joke around with men, and that the two cancers I got are below the belt. They're the most embarrassing cancers you can get to talk about. And just as women didn't talk about breast cancer 20 years ago because it felt impolite, same thing goes for guys. And so guys don't talk about health conditions very well generally. You layer onto it the level of embarrassment around sexual function and GI issues, and it makes it even more difficult. And I always say to guys who are recently diagnosed with prostate cancer, look, if you didn't have a great relationship going into it, this probably isn't going to make it any better, but it is an opportunity to make it better. It's an opportunity to communicate your fears, your hopes, your wishes, your dreams, your desires, and everything else, because most of us are scared. We just don't say it. And most of us are scared when it comes to particularly prostate cancer about what happens to my sex life, what happens to my ability to function. And in almost every culture, so much with masculinity and men's health is defined around reproduction, sexual function, that kind of thing. And so it's the number one thing that guys are afraid of. And I always say to guys, look, talk to your doctor. That's the one who has more answers than anybody else. But you should be talking to your partner or spouse as well, because they're thinking about it. You're thinking about it. If you just walk around pretending everything is fine, then you're not going to have those conversations. The other piece of advice I would give caregivers out there, particularly around cancer issues, try to avoid the online message boards. My wife and I both looked at social media boards, and there are cancer survivor groups. There are caregivers groups, and some of the information in those groups is very supportive and very helpful and on point, and some of it is just trash, right? And so you have people with all different levels of functioning and share their opinions and share their experiences. And I found this with guys who are dealing with prostate cancer. Like, some of the stories they told, I'm like, oh my God, I hope this doesn't happen to me. It wasn't helpful.
Yeah.
And same thing happened with my wife. She looked at caregiver groups, and, they talked about folks that hadn't really had a real conversation in 20 years. And cancer doesn't necessarily mean you're going to start having those things, but it could. So couple things. Be wary about where you get support, but get support, right? Important that you not try to do it alone. You don't always have to have the perfect thing to say. You don't always have to have the right thing to say. Sometimes just being there in that space together provides a lot of comfort and reassurance. And then the other thing is, to the extent that you can communicate, and really important to check in, really important to to talk about how you're feeling. What's your biggest worry in all of this? What are the things that you fear the most? What are you worried about in terms of the worst case scenario? What's our best case scenario here? So just three quick ideas that come to mind.
And I really appreciate that, and the fact that you're naming that these conversations aren't easy and they come with each person's own anxiety or concerns about it, and that the importance is having connection, being able to carefully have a conversation that's respectful for both of you so that the person who is caring for you understands what you need and where you're at. And also that then you also have the same. You understand where they're at, what their capacity is, so that you can work together to get the best outcome in what is a very dreadful situation that nobody would want even for their worst enemy. And you've been talking about the triathlon and the training for the preparation for that. But cancer is not a race anybody chooses. Can you share a specific moment during your radiation or your chemo journey where your athletic mindset helped you get through something that is concrete?
So I mentioned that I was part of a clinical trial for the colorectal cancer. And at the outset of it, we mapped out 27 rounds of radiation and 35 rounds of chemo. And we were about 2/3 of the way through the chemo piece. And my oncologist said to me, all right, so I told you there might come a point in time where the side effects have mounted up, your blood counts have begun to drop, and we've probably gotten the return on investment we're going to get. And he said, we're there. Oh, your blood counts are shot. We have to put you in the hospital. You're complaining about the side effects, neuropathy, that kind of thing. And we've probably done the best we could in terms of the eventual outcome. And he said to me, but I suspect that you're not going to love that. And I said, not only don't I love that, but if I have to go buy chemo on the street in order to finish what we started, then that's what I'm going to do. But you told me at the outset that we needed to power through this. Completing this course of treatment would give me the best possible chance at a lasting and permanent response. And I want that. So we're not quitting. So I always equate it to mile 18 of the marathon. I've done 15 separate marathons aside from Ironman. And mile 18 of the marathon is a very dark and ugly space, right? You're a couple hours into the race. You're exhausted. Your mind is telling you to quit. Your mind is saying to you, why in God's name are you doing this? Nobody is chasing you. You haven't robbed the bank. At the end of this, you get the same free banana and bottle of water that everybody gets. You get the same plastic medal that you can't even wear to work the next day. You should just stop. But if you keep going, either because you focus in on what the goal is or you distract yourself in some other way, you just keep going. And by the time you get to mile 22, all of that's gone because now you're like, I'm just about finished. I've only got a 5K to go. I am just about done. And I did this. And imagine how good that finish line is going to feel. Well, this was the same thing. So I needed to power through. And there were times during chemo, and everybody's chemo experience is different. I worked through my treatment because I needed to, and that wasn't to play the martyr and it's not to brag. It's what I needed to do to distract myself. But everybody has a different experience when it comes to chemo. But I would wake up in the morning, feel nauseous, sometimes throw up. And the first time it happened, I said, maybe I shouldn't go to work today. And then I thought to myself, I throw up during races all the time. Like that's what you do, right? It happens. And you don't stop and you don't say, oh, I threw up. I need to stop. You wipe your face off and you keep going. And so this became the same thing. You wipe your face off and you keep going and you come to work. And when I came to work, honestly, I didn't think about being nauseous. I didn't think about anything other than my work. And my work involves working for a large charity where we help people. And so it gave me purpose, focus, direction, distraction, all of those things. And so the attitude that we just have to keep going. Yes, it's hard. Triathlon taught me how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and it doesn't have to rule your life and you don't have to stop. You acknowledge it and say, this is uncomfortable. It sucks, but you keep going. And maybe there's a lesson there for caregivers as well. And that there are times when it seems overwhelming. There are times when it seems like it's a lot. But then there are those glorious moments of victory and clarity, and whether or not the person you love does well with treatment or not so well with treatment, the victory is in creating those moments together, and those moments live forever. And quite frankly, the way I look at it, those moments outlive and outlast cancer any day of the week.
Which is beautiful because that is something that we really focus on here, is finding the joy in the really tough, gritty moments, because that's what the person that you're supporting is going to remember. Not that they didn't feel well in that moment, they'll remember the joy, particularly if you add your 5 senses into that so that it's not just a one touch, but you've got 5 points of
Right.
memory
Right.
there. From what you're talking about, was there a point where you had to stop trying to manage like your whole future, like planning, and just focus on, I can make it to the next appointment, I can make it to the next hour, and I can make it to the next breath?
Yeah, I think so. And that's the way you get through races. If you
Mm.
think about an Ironman and say, I've got to do all these things in under 17 hours, it becomes really challenging. If instead you focus on the moment and say, I just need to keep swimming another 30 yards, 50 yards, that kind of thing. If I just keep running, and sometimes in races, when I'm tired, I'll distract myself by counting my steps and say, I'm just going to do 100 steps. And then I'll reevaluate. And of course, I'm going to keep going. But if you think about the full span and the full distance, it becomes overwhelming. If you take it a piece at a time, it becomes easier. And so I had chart with my chemo treatments up on the wall, and I checked them off as if I were in a prison cell. So much so, and I haven't told the story very often, we had mapped out my radiation treatments, and somehow I had messed up the count. And so they called me and said, all right, so tomorrow's your last radiation treatment. And I'm like, no, it's not. I have 2 more. And I'm literally arguing with them about the number of treatments that I have left. And I didn't believe her, the medical office person, who wound up calling my oncologist to say, they're telling me that I only have 1 more, but I think it's 2. And he's like, no, you have 1 more. Like, stop fighting with us. And I think it becomes easier if you get through the periods of time you need to get through. The other thing I would say to caregivers is that sometimes the people you're caring for are jerks. I like to think that was never me at all, but it's a lot. And there are times that you do and say things that you actually don't really mean, that you're frustrated, you're frightened, you're scared, you're testing that person a little bit to see how mad they get at you and testing their loyalty. Treatment, it throws you into a spin. I liken it to, in the beginning of Ironman triathlons, literally you're taking 3,000 people who are all type A's and throwing them in the water at the same time. And when you put people in the water, they do funny things when they're trying to survive. And so it's like being thrown into literally a washing machine. And so it's a really ugly scene. Well, that's like what navigating treatment is. When you're thrown into this, it's like you're thrown into that washing machine and you're just gasping for air and flailing around and doing your best to survive. And sometimes in that flailing around, you knock somebody else inadvertently. And sometimes that's the person you love the most. And so I always say to families, don't take anything too seriously because we don't necessarily mean it. Some of that is fear. Some of it is, look, the side effects associated with chemo and the things that happen to your body during chemo are very, very unpredictable. There were side effects I had where I'm like, are you kidding me? A spot would show up on my face. By the time I called the doctor and said, what is this? And took a picture of it, it was gone. And so weird things happen to you physically and emotionally as you're navigating this. I've seen folks who are enduring treatment lash out at the people they love. And that's part of the process. And it's easy for me to say to the caregivers out there, you kind of have to suck it up and just blow it off and not take it too seriously. Easier said than done. But I will say we're going through a lot. And sometimes we say things that we that we regret. And particularly for men, you regret it, but you're also a little bit unsure as to how to fix it.
Yes, and it's being able to have grace for yourself and the caregiver having it both ways as well, for understanding that it's really hard to go through any medical process that changes or alters how you respond physically, your emotional state, physical state, your exhaustion. There are so many factors that come into play for both parties, but I feel like grace is something that is really important to understand, and that when the person you're caring for, if they're capable of it, having the hard conversation of what happens if we have a difficult day? How do we come back to that space? And it's such a caregiver reality sometimes that the win isn't feeling good all the time. It's simply getting through without losing yourself completely by the next breath, the next appointment, the next task. And I think also something that I took from that is where you had the calendar on the wall and you were ticking off and you had the end in sight. Just like when you're talking about the triathlon, you know that it finishes in 5Ks or it finishes in 10Ks and you've just got to put one foot in front of the other. And having different strategies to help regulate your own self in those situations where you feel anxious, like I can't do this anymore, I feel really unwell, this is not fair. I think it's really great to stop for both parties and to love each other in a way that gives you space and time to process what's happening.
Absolutely. And look, there's also a practical, component to caregiving, as you know. My wife went with me to every medical appointment, every chemo session in the infusion room with me while I wore ice packs on my hands and feet and that kind of thing. I think I'm pretty astute and very communicative with doctors and very aware of, the patient-doctor relationship. And I feel like it's pretty even keeled. I think there are people that walk into doctors' offices and say, I'm the patient. I'm not supposed to ask questions. I'm not of that mindset. And so I view it really as teamwork, and we're on an even playing field. But there are times when we'd leave a doctor's appointment, I'd say, the doctor said this. And she'd say, that's not exactly what he said. She would take notes and I'd be like, do you have to put the notebook in? And it just seems weird. But we went back to those notes, and it was great to have the checks and balances where I would say, what I heard him say is this. And she'd say, well, I heard something a little bit different, and I'm the one that made the notes. And so very, very helpful to have that extra set of ears and eyes in the room. And there were times when my doctor would ask me about side effects and I wanted to be done with the appointment. Just, no, 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 I'm good. I have none of that. And she would say, well, hold up. That's not what you said yesterday. Right. And so it really is a partnership. I took up triathlon in part because I wanted to do for myself, and it's not a team sport. It's only you. And so it's really you against you. I guess you're racing alongside other people, but I'm at an age where I'm not going to come in first. I'm probably not going to come in last. And so it doesn't really matter. But triathlon, although it's a solo sport, really involves a whole bunch of people that make sure that you are safe. Because there's lifeguards in the water, there's folks out on the bike course making sure you're safe, there's people at the finish line cheering you in. And it's really a community that comes together, even though you think of it as a solitary sport. Cancer care or dealing with any medical condition is best played as a team sport. Your ability to do it alone is pretty limited. And so you need to figure out who's on your team. And the person who's closest to you, I guess your oncologist should be your coach in some regards if we're drawing sports parallels. But your partner is pretty darn important in all of that. And your ability to have someone beside you, whether that's a partner, spouse, or a close friend, is really important because they see things and hear things that you just can't see and hear. They also have the ability to kind of check things with you and say, I don't know how you're feeling today, but you look really pale. Are you good?
Mm.
And having that kind of person to check in with, besides the emotional, right? The emotional is probably the most important, but the practical side of things is really important. I was not in any shape, particularly at the end of chemo, because it's cumulative, to drive home from some of my chemo. And it's good to have somebody by your side. I write in the book about how my relationship with other men changed, and it changed pretty dramatically. I'd never really had male friends that said, I love you to me. Like maybe the drunken backslapping, I love you, man, kind of thing, at the end of a long night. But this was more genuine and heartfelt. And the first couple of times it happened to me, I immediately, we would have lunch, have dinner, and they would say that. And I had 3 friends in particular who did it. And I'd get in the car and look in the mirror and say, they must think I'm going to die. They thought this was like the Last Supper and I'm checking out, which is disconnected because they talked about how good I looked. And so I'd look in the mirror and be like, do I look that bad? Like I'm going to check out. And then I realized that it was all about them really solidifying the connection as I went through this. I had another friend who said to me, look, I'm always around to take you to chemo if you want, but I know you'll never take me up on that. And it stuck with me, and I didn't take him up on it. And I regret that now because him taking me to chemo was not about me. This was about him and his ability to become part of the journey in a way that wasn't just us sitting down and having lunch and talking about it in the abstract. And so he was asking for an invitation into this. And so I always say to folks in my position that are on the other side of the equation, let people in. Let people in because they need that as much as you do. And sometimes it's not about you. So stop being selfish and let people actually help you. It also would have given my primary caregiver a little bit of a break, right? I would have been able to say to her, not that I think she would have done it either, but I would have been able to say, look, if you don't want to take me to chemo tomorrow, Ellie's ready, willing, and able to bring me to chemo. And she wouldn't have said yes to that. But it's an important conversation to understand that when people offer to help you with something, it's as much about them and the relationship as it is about you. You may not need the help, but sometimes letting people in just a little bit goes a long way.
It gives me a sigh of relief because that's something that I have learnt recently because early on in my caregiving journey, when somebody asked me, I just didn't have the bandwidth to even think of how they could help me or I was embarrassed because I didn't want them to see my vulnerability and how, much I was struggling in that space. And now as I'm older and I've been doing this for, 14 years in the caregiving space, it's different. And you have different relationships. Having a loved one, husband, a wife who is really supportive. How did you find balancing a caregiver role and a partner role, being a patient and a partner, caregiver and a partner, when fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty were constant players in the game?
Look, I think we just did what came naturally. And I don't think by any stretch of the imagination we always did it perfectly, but pretty damn close. And so I recognized when I was in a lousy mood. I recognized when the chemo and the treatment had gotten to me. One of the things about being an athlete is that you swim, bike, and or run every day. And so for me, that was my release. That was where I got my mental health care, that kind of space. And then when you can't do that to the same extent, I did exercise straight through chemo, but I wasn't going out and running 10 miles. You'd be amazed at how therapeutic a 10-mile run is. And then when you stop doing that 10-mile run and you change it to a 2-mile walk, it's not the same as if you drink 5 cups of coffee a day and then you try to go a day with only 1 cup of coffee. You know that there's a reality. There's a withdrawal symptom that goes there. And so the same thing happened to me. I would get back from my runs and my wife would say, "How did it go?" And I had the same answer every time. It was pathetic because I felt like I had lost fitness and I wasn't running as much and just mental health was way out of sorts. But she rolled with it and she said, "Look, at least you're out there. You're out there and you're doing it," kind of thing. And so I think those moments really drew us closer. She's also an incredibly patient person. I am not. In fact, I said to her, "God forbid you get sick, because I don't think I could ever do this as gracefully as you have." Like, there's no doubt in my mind that I couldn't. We don't have the same patience. We don't have the same care and compassion. Look, I've run not-for-profit organizations for 30 years, but I'm not the one doing direct hands-on care. I balances spreadsheets and raises money and manages staff. And so I will say she's far more patient than I could ever be. And that too was a wake-up call for me, because I would say, "Boy, if this ever happened to you, I don't think I could do it as well as you." That prompted me to say, "All right, so that's pretty lousy. Like, why can't you? You could do anything else you put your mind to it. And so man up and get the skills you need now so that you can reciprocate if and when something happens." So I almost feel like that acknowledgement and that, "Look, you're doing this really well. I don't know that I would do it as well," gave me the impetus to say, "Well, you should figure that out." Rather than just acknowledging and say, "Well, I never could." Figure it out. Find a way.
Find that when you were just talking about the difference and recognizing the difference between what you would be able to do if the roles were reversed. Many carers are managing admin, emotions, meals, work, finances during these really difficult periods in life. If you could speak directly to that person, what would you want them to know about their role and their limits?
You're achieving more than it seems. You don't always see the payoff right away. So if you're able to keep it together, and look, there's lots of caregivers who are caring for a partner or a spouse who also have children, who also have a full-time job, who are also worried about the financial aspects of this, which I'm thankful that I didn't have to worry about. And so there are folks that don't have the same privileges that we did. And what I would say is it's a balancing act, and you're doing better than you think. We're always more critical of ourselves than we think. And the people around you appreciate you more than you know, even if they don't always say it. Right. And so I didn't, as often as I should, I didn't sit my wife down and say, "Look, you're really killing it in terms of doing this, and it's awesome, and I just couldn't be more thankful." I can say it now, but I think in the heat of the moment and kind of going through it, that was the last thing on my mind. The first thing on my mind was, what weird side effect of chemo am I going to have tomorrow? Is the chemo actually working? What happens when I go for scans, and what's the 5-year survival rate? And you're so focused on you. And eventually you cross this path, either because you've gotten a clean bill of health, at least for the time being, or you haven't gotten it and you're beginning to wrestle with, a more serious prognosis that perhaps involves a time frame. I think at some point you settle into that a little bit, and then you're able to have more open, honest, and intimate conversations. But for folks that are in the midst of the chaos, understand that you're doing better than you think, and we're more thankful than you'll ever know, even if we can't say it.
I think that's a beautiful sentiment, because it's a feeling of not being seen. And I think having that recognition no matter where you are. But even hearing it from somebody else that you are seen, that we recognize what's going on and we are thankful, we're grateful, goes a long way, even if it's from somebody else. Listening to your story and what your wife supported you through, and that it's hard when you're in the season to take yourself out of that season to see what's around you because you're focused on getting to the next point where you feel healthier, you feel better, you're on the path of recovery. And I think it's really important just to hear from you, anybody who is in this journey, that you're seen. We appreciate you. We're grateful for it. And we will, when we're well, we'll be able to show you that that's how we felt during that process. And I think also one thing I really respect from our conversation is that you don't sanitize this story. You don't downplay it as something that is not raw and difficult, and having all of these moments where you have to battle yourself with your mind, how you feel, your body. You wrote candidly about the messy, unfiltered parts of treatment and recovery. Why was it important to include this raw reality?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of survivors of any illness. You come out the other side and then you talk about your survivorship. And it's almost like talking only about the finish line in a race. Everybody's smiling, everybody's happy, but there's another side to this. And I felt like I wanted to validate the experience that other folks may have had. And so I'm very careful when I talk about kind of the variation in experiences when it comes to cancer in particular. I was able to exercise through chemo. That's not the reality for everybody. I was able to come to work every day because of the nature of my job. Worked on a highway crew doing physical labor. I wouldn't have been able to come to work. And so I'm really clear where I have privilege and where I use that privilege, and not everybody has it. I'm also really clear, especially here in the States, that there are healthcare disparities based on race, religion, income, sexual orientation. I didn't have to deal with a lot of those barriers that other folks confront in the healthcare system here in America. And so I wanted to lay it all out. I didn't want to give just the, hey, I survived cancer. It's awesome. Here's a picture of me ringing the bell. Lots of cancer survivors come to understand that, ringing the bell at the completion of treatment is not the end. And so my doctors talk about how there's no evidence of disease now, which is generally a good term, right? You're happy about that. But there's plenty of evidence that cancer leaves behind. And some of those pieces of evidence include the side effects associated with chemo. It's a toxic substance. It's been poured into your body. The effects I know about are really clear. And then I still have neuropathy and I still have other things that come and go. But there's some other side effects too. I go for scans every 4 months now. I was going every 3 months. And there's this anxiety that goes along with that. And so for a week before the scans, I know that I'm out of sorts because I'm worried about what it's going to show up. And so it's like walking into the casino. You spin the roulette wheel, and if it lands on red, you're good for another 4 months. If it lands on black, guess what? You're going right back to cancer land with IV poles and ill-fitting hospital gowns. So I'm very keyed into there's more side effects than become obvious, but there's also some good side effects. And I am not one of those that say cancer or any illness is a gift. Thank God this happened to me. No, it's miserable. It's horrible. Cancer and its treatments are lousy. But if you look, you can find and take some good things out of the experience. And for me, that includes the closeness and intimacy in my relationship with my spouse. It includes the relationship I have with my friends, particularly my male friends. It includes me doing the soul searching I needed to do in terms of a higher power. And the reality is, in life, we sometimes start thinking about our own mortality, but don't fully resolve those questions because they're not relevant. They're hard to answer and they're not relevant. Diagnosis like the two I got forces you to think those things through and say, what do I believe happens when you die? How do you answer questions when you look into the eyes of your 12-year-old son, as I did, and he asks you, Dad, are you going to die? Oh, we're all going to die sometime. I don't think this is my time. So you have to wrestle with those things. The other things that came out of this for me, just an incredible sense of gratitude and thankfulness. And so in some ways, it's because of that gratitude that I want to share the message with other people. I want to encourage them to get screened. I want to encourage athletes not to ignore symptoms that happen in your body and chalk it up to the fact that we beat ourselves up physically every day. I want to send a message to caregivers that we see you, we hear you, you make a huge difference whether or not we say it every day or not. Most of us wouldn't survive this without the folks that are by our sides. We wouldn't survive it emotionally, and maybe we wouldn't even survive it physically.
In saying that your journey was rough, it was definitely not something that you had planned in your life's journey, and that it altered how you could approach exercise, how you approached getting up of the morning, how you ate when appointments happened, and your treatment pathway. And like a race, as you're going along, you're celebrating clear scans or completed treatment plans. How did you learn, and how can carers learn to let small wins matter?
I think first and foremost, you have to notice them. I mentioned gratitude a minute ago, and I'll never forget sitting in the infusion room and looking outside. And there were people, I think there were hospital staff running up and down the sidewalk on our lunch breaks. And I'm like, what I wouldn't give to be out there. And I think I have a triathlon coach, and they would always say, I have to do a 5 mile run today, or I have to do 20 on the bike. I don't have to, I get to. And that moment for me was like a turning point in saying, I don't have to run today. I actually get to run today. And there are points during the journey where I was grateful for the ability to be able to run. And I think so often we walk around life saying, I have to go pick up my kids from soccer, or I have to go to work today, or I have to, give him lunch, or I have to do this. I have to clean the house. No, we get to do those things. There's people who would kill for the opportunity to have a child. There's people who would, kill to have the opportunity to have a home that they needed to clean, or kill for the opportunity to have their loved one back in order to make them lunch and spend some time together. Those aren't things we have to do. They're things that we get to do. And I think acknowledging and noticing those things in the smallest moments, for people that have the diagnosis, sometimes that's early. That's easier because you're in the thick of it. For the caregiver, sometimes it's like, oh my God, what does he want now? And so I think it's easier if you're in the seat, but if you're really connected and you really look for those moments to say, at the end of the day, what was I grateful for today? And sometimes 3 or 4 things. What was I grateful for today? And sometimes you had a lousy day, but the point is you woke up today. If you're caregiving for somebody who's really challenging, you had another day. And all is said and done, you had another day. And we all know that for all of us, those days will sometime end. When I think about folks that I've lost now, there's lots of folks where I would give anything just to spend another 5 or 10 minutes with them. If you said, give up everything you have to be able to spend another hour with your mother or something like that, we would all do that in a heartbeat. And so you don't have to be in that situation to imagine it. We can all start practicing that right now.
I love that. Practicing right now, regardless. Because as a caregiver, often you can feel really guilty about celebrating anything. Like joy is being disloyal to the seriousness of everything that's going on. What would you say about letting small good moments count during treatment without having to carry that guilt of offending or upsetting your loved one?
Yeah, look, I'm probably a little bit selfish in that I love when people are miserable with me. But I think it's important to have those light moments. I've joked around with all my medical staff, right? I probably annoyed the heck out of them, but they would come and you have to give your name and date of birth at least 100 times because they want to make sure they're giving chemo to the right person. I would always give my oncologist name and just make up a date of birth, right? And it would stop them dead in their tracks. I would, when they put an IV in, I would fall out as if I had passed out. And they'd be like, are you okay? Well, yeah, I'm just messing with you, which drove my partner crazy as well. But you have to find those light moments, and that this is all serious stuff. And there's plenty of time for serious stuff, but you have to enjoy the lightness. For caregivers, you have to find some normalcy in life, and you have to do things that are not that person. Just getting away for a period of time, I think, is really, really important. And I would always say to my wife, she'd be like, you going to be okay? I'm like, yes, go get your nails done. I could use the peace and quiet too. Please go. And so we have to almost give each other permission to say, yeah, go. I could use 10 minutes alone, right? Feel free. And I do think you're right that caregivers often are like, well, I'm going out and having a good time and he's miserable. We're actually not as miserable as you think. We want you to go out and have a good time. We want you to come home and make us dinner and whatever else. But I think as important it is, and one of the things that we know in racing is that if you're running a marathon and you take off, at least for me, running a 7-minute mile, guess what? By a mile into it, you're going to be dying and there's zero chance you're going to finish. Caregiving is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so you need to pace yourself and you need to nourish nourish yourself with goodness and nourish yourself with connection and do things that please you and stimulate you and relax you and that kind of thing, your life doesn't stop because you're a caregiver. And in fact, there's an opportunity to make it even richer. And unless you take care of yourself, you're no good to the person you're caring for.
That's such a radiant moment of truth that joy doesn't erase the reality. It gives the nervous system a reason to keep going in this marathon that is caregiving through cancer or any other medical treatment. I'd love to close by speaking directly to the person listening who's with us right now. If you were sitting with one exhausted caregiver, someone trying to stay steady but quietly falling apart, what would you most want them to hear?
You're doing better than you think. It doesn't feel obvious and it feels like you're falling apart. You're actually not. It just feels that way at this point in time. And it won't always feel that way. I promise you. Find a way to get some perspective on things. And that might mean going for a 10-minute walk. It might be listening to music. It might be reading your favorite book. It could be any number of things, but get the time and space away. And things always seem different when you come back. Right? And so find a way to get that distance. Find a way to get that space. Vocalize what you're feeling. Find someone you can confide in, whether it's the person you're caring for, a therapist or a stranger, somebody you can confide in and say, I feel like I'm falling apart, because that's where you're going to hear you're actually not. You're actually doing unbelievable things. The last thing I'd say is be careful about your self-talk. I often tell folks, if we talk to our friends the way we talk to ourselves, we wouldn't have any more friends, right? And so be
true.
very mindful of the way you talk to yourself. It's very easy for us to beat ourselves up, right? We're not doing enough. We're not this enough. We're not that enough. We replay conversations in our minds over and over and over again. Give yourself some grace.
Another question I'd love to ask you is, what's one small anchor that helped you through the hardest stretch? Something a caregiver could try this week without adding additional pressure.
Any kind of exercise whatsoever. And I'm not suggesting that your audience go out and do an Ironman or run a marathon, although you're more than welcome to do that. 10 minutes of walking in fresh air. Find a way to carve out time and space for you. Doesn't matter if it's 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Lots of folks, including my oncologist, said to me, you should try meditation. I'm like, I hate meditation. My mind races. That's not for me. Now, give me 20 minutes to go out and run around my neighborhood. I come back a new person. And so we know that exercise does that for you, whether it's yoga, whether it's running, whether it's walking, whether it's putting together a jigsaw puzzle. Find some way to reconnect with yourself. You know, we've talked a lot about connecting with the person you're caring for, but reconnecting with yourself and who you are and how you live and why you're doing this is really important. And do it on a daily basis. It's like that booster shot that you need every once in a while.
It's creating that non-negotiable space for you to fill up your cup for yourself. I really wanted to ask you a question about Every Mile Matters. If someone is facing the race they never signed up for, what's the one takeaway you hope they receive from your book?
Keep going. Keep going, right? One of the things that we always say in triathlon is that the end is closer than you think. And I've seen people who drop out of races, they're exhausted, they just say, I can't go on, I am done. And I often feel like, geez, you were just like at the edge of success and then you bailed. And so you're sometimes closer to happiness, sometimes closer to glory, sometimes closer to contentment, however you define that, than you think. You just need to sit for a little while longer and you're going to get there.
It's such an important message that not every hard moment lasts a lifetime.
That's right.
That it could be just around the corner. And instead of being stuck in a state of despair, just those extra couple of steps can take you over into a new space. And that could be listening to an Audible book or reading a book or a podcast or having a chat with a family member or a friend. It could just help you get around that bend. So thank you so much for that. Could you share where listeners could actually find your book and read it?
Sure, I would love that. So it's called Every Mile Matters, Turning Triathlon Training into Cancer Triumph. Published it last fall, available on Barnes & Noble, Amazon, all the places that you would buy books. If all else fails, there's a book website. It's called everymilematters.com. I have a personal website, jeffreyreynolds.com. I'm on all the socials, yes, even TikTok. So look me up, generally, Dr. Jeffrey Reynolds. as the handle.
Fantastic. And for all of my listeners, I will include all of Jeffrey's links in the show notes for you to find and check him out and make sure that you're following him. Jeffrey, thank you so much for your honest and human conversation. I know this will land for carers who are supporting someone through cancer or they have supported someone through cancer, and also for people who are quietly terrified and trying to keep functioning day to day. Today, we've talked about what it's like to receive life-changing news in an ordinary moment, how endurance and mindset can help and where control ends, what caregivers really carry behind the scenes, and how meaning can shift when the goal becomes simply getting through. If something in this episode resonated with you, your only invitation is this: let one small win count this week. One moment of support accepted, one moment of breath, one task you didn't have to do alone. And to everyone listening, thank you for spending time with us. You don't have to hold it all alone. I'm Michelle, and this is Radiant Moments. Until next time, take gentle care of your radiant moments and of yourself.